3 years ago now, or so it seems. Maybe 2016. I'm pretty sure I got my year right. I was a junior in high school, and just got out of high school. It was roughly in the evening time, maybe 4 or 5, and so I went off into the woods, goofing around, taking selfies, and just enjoying some fresh air before heading home for the evening. This is in the state of Maryland, and as you know, Maryland isn't really big. But as I'm sitting on this log, trying to take a good selfie, I heard something large approaching me, directly ahead of me. I put my cell phone down, listening, and hearing something approaching more and more. Whatever it was, I could tell was incredibly large. I was curious, and stood up, getting ready to guard my ground, thinking it was probably a homeless person, and that maybe I had somehow stumbled upon their little encampment, despite there being any evidence of any homeless camps, tents, or belongings. And that's when I began to see this massive black shape appearing more and more throughout the trees. The closer it came, the more details I could see. I clearly realized this was not a person in any way, shape, or form. The closer this thing came, the more I could see this was some sort of demented animal-looking thing. Its eyes were the first thing that drew me in. They were kind of yellow and gold, and had a weird shape to them, and they stared back at me, very strangely, and I could see, through the light that I had, that this thing had horns on its head. Not like a devil, but more like a ram or a goat. It was very strange looking. Because it was so dark, the creature, not the lighting, I couldn't see every little nook and cranny of detail. But I could tell you it was dark, had very dark hair, and a very long face. It kind of just stared at me, watching me from behind a few trees, covered enough by brush that it was somewhat concealed. I've heard of stories of the Maryland GOATMAN before, but I always just used to think it was tales. Stories spread by kids trying to scare other kids. Or maybe just a good ghost story to get everybody spooked. And there's always folklore and legends of the land that get around. But like I said, I was never a believer. But after this experience, I can firmly say I do believe that the Maryland GOATMAN exists. And I saw it with my own eyes. This thing was hideous, and it was watching me. I feel like had I stayed there, I could tell it was planning on doing something. What? I don't know. But I noped out of there before I could ever give it a chance to act on it. Luckily, it didn't follow me, as I was pretty close to a road that took me back to my house. I don't go in those woods anymore. For the rest of that year, my senior year, and afterwards, I know it's around, and I do not want to give it a chance to meet me firsthand. Last summer, I was with my dad out fishing on a small pond, and as we were coming back up on shore, something charged us. Whatever this something was on 2 legs, covered in gray hair, very long hair, and kind of looked like a goat. I know that sounds weird, but that's what I saw. Luckily, I had my 9mm on me. Not enough to do much damage, but it's better than nothing. I mean, I nearly only brought my pocket knife. I'm glad at the last minute I decided against it. Now, we were coming back on shore, having been out on the pond for probably 4.5 hours at this point. As I was getting out, helping my dad out, I hear some rustling in the bushes, probably about 100 feet away from me, all the way to my left. This puzzled me and my father, because we were in an area where there shouldn't be any large animals coming through. I mean, here in Texas, you get all sorts of stuff, but this kind of commotion was too noisy. It was almost man-like or man-made, as if somebody was intentionally trying to make as much noise as they possibly could. That's when this thing charged out of the brush at my father and I, while my father getting out of the boat and I helping him out. Just out of reaction, I reached in, my coat, pulled out my 9mm, fired a couple shots directly at this thing, which, by the way, was much taller than me and my father. I'm 6'2". My dad's 5'9". Don't ask me where I got my height. I think it's from my mom's side of the family. I'm pretty sure I hit this thing point blank. It was probably maybe 60, 50 feet away from me as I fired all 3 shots. That's when it stopped and darted off in a different area of the forest, making an even more horrendous scream than when it came out. Whatever it was acted pissed. I don't know where it came from or why it decided to charge us. For all I know, it could have been sitting there in the woods surrounding the pond, watching us, waiting for the right moment to strike. I don't even want to think about that. I'm very fortunate that it at least waited until we got back on shore to try and attack. Had we been in the water, and this thing could have jumped onto our boat or tried to capsize us, I don't know if we'd be here telling you the story. The main purpose in me writing you this email isn't necessarily just to tell you my story. I want to try and identify what it is that I saw. It was easily maybe 8 to 9 feet tall, and I don't think it was a Bigfoot or any other cryptid that I've heard you talk about. This thing was something else entirely. It had a very elongated face, kind of had hair that drooped down, large, sharp teeth that protruded from each end of its mouth, kind of like canines, but a little bit different, and had weird red eyes. Not like Hollywood monster glowing eyes. These were a deep red. And I'm trying to sit here and think as I type this, what kind of animal has eyes like this? No, oh well, I guess it escapes me. But the eyes weren't glowing or anything supernatural looking. They looked natural. And its head was shaped more like a stag, if that makes any sense. It also had horns protruding from the very top of its head that reminded me somewhat between a ram and a gazelle. Its lower body was more slender and lankier, where its upper body was more built, wider, and had some rippling muscles on the front part of it. It all happened so fast, so I didn't get to sit there and study it and observe every little bit of this animal. But whatever it was, even though I shot it point blank 3 times, didn't even seem to react to my bullets. It seemed to be startled by the noises of the gunshots more than anything else. I didn't see any blood, so I want to say I got it. In fact, I'm pretty sure I got it. I shot it 3 times, from about 50 feet away, but I saw no blood come from the wound, or drip down, or any sort of blood trail. So I'm not exactly sure how to explain that. That in itself is kind of a supernatural feat. After it took off, bolting off into the woods, I could hear it screaming and screaming as it ran off in a distance. It wasn't a kind of scream, like in pain. It was more like an angry scream. I don't know how to describe it. And the sound of the scream, well, if I could replay it for you, it would make the hair on the back of your neck stand up. It was something otherworldly. After it ran off, I quickly helped pull my dad out of the boat, as he's older, and him and I nearly just looked at each other, wondering, what in the hell was that thing? But we both agreed we should get our boat back onto the truck and get out of there as fast as we could, in case this thing decided to come back, or worse, bring a couple buddies with him. So we took about 10 minutes, loading the boat back and getting everything we had back in the truck, and we took off out of there, making sure to not leave anything behind that we would need to come retrieve later on. And that would have been a mess. The area in which this whole event occurred was northeastern Texas. I hope this finds you well, and I hope you can help me properly identify exactly what this creature was. This story that I'm about to tell you occurred last year in 2019 on March 5th. I'll never forget it. I was driving outside of Louisville, Kentucky, when I saw this bizarre-looking animal walking on its hind legs across the road, dragging a dead deer. I'm not sure if the deer was already dead, roadkill, or if this thing killed it. But it seemed to pay no mind to me. I came upon it slowly, and even ended up having to halt my vehicle, pressing fully on my brakes as this thing casually strode and went across the road. It paid no attention to try and hurry and rush. It just took its time, dragging this deer. I couldn't help but watch in horror, trying to figure out what exactly I was looking at. Could this have been a person in a Halloween costume? It's not really likely. The area I was in was pretty rural, and virtually zero communities around where I was. Well, maybe not zero communities, but houses were pretty spread out. There would be no incentive for anybody to be out here this late at night, dragging a dead deer off into the woods, across the road. It just didn't make any sense. Because it walked so slowly, I got a very good look at it. It was covered in long, gray, strangly hair, had a very elongated face, like that of a horse or maybe a goat, except much, much uglier. It had strange eyes. They were kind of more human-like. It's hard to say, but I can clearly remember its gait and how weird it kind of hobbled around. I didn't see its lower half really as much as I did its upper half, but its posture almost reminded me of the hunchback of Notre Dame. It had a terrible hunch in its back, and I immediately thought this creature might have scoliosis, if that's what it was. But it just had one arm behind it, dragging the deer, and paying no mind to my vehicle, looking directly ahead, and just casually pulling this deer along. As soon as it crossed the road, it disappeared into the forest, and that was that. I sat there for a minute, trying to process and fully digest what it is that I just saw. Clearly, this had to have been an elaborate prank, with a $2,000 Halloween costume. There's no way this was real. I continued driving, thinking about what I saw non-stop, and every conclusion I could come to made no sense of why a person would be doing just that. It had to have been something other than a person. An animal. But I've never seen an animal that looked like that. After a short amount of time, I gave up on putting so much mental energy and focus on it, and just contributed to another freaky thing that happened in my life. After discovering the whole scary story thing, and listening to monsters and cryptids, and knowing more now what I do than I did then, I'm almost certain I saw a GOATMAN. Hey there, what lurks beneath. It's Brian again. I messaged you a few weeks back about what I believe to be a vampire cult hidden Blue Ridge mountain range of the eastern United States. Well, I got a couple of more interesting stories and accounts for you. Several, actually, on different subjects, in which I will send to you in another email here shortly. But for now, this email, I wanted to tackle the sightings and encounters I've heard and read about on mermaids. While many might believe mermaids to be this fantasy, bright, bubbly creature, as portrayed in the Disney films, I'm here to tell you that based on stories, accounts, and encounter stories, they are nothing like that. They're hideous, and quite hostile, to say the least, nearly drowning a few victims, have human-level intelligence, if not smarter, and just like dolphins, swim in packs or pods. I'm not sure what you would refer to a pack of mermaids as, but they are very intelligent beings. I have a staggering amount of stories and encounters of just mermaids alone that I could share with you, that I've heard about, read about, and that have been personally shared with me. I think more than any other water cryptid there is out there. Maybe that's saying something about the world, and the condition in which things are kept hidden, but that would end up in an email probably 2 to 3 hours long for me to write out. So I'll keep this short. The first one I'll share with you is from 2 fishermen outside of Greece. They both were attacked by about 3 or 4 of these things, nearly torn out of their boat. One almost had his arm torn off his body. Everything they caught was also stolen. I couldn't quite get out of them the size of the boat they were in. It wasn't just a small rowboat, but it wasn't an industrial-sized fishing boat either. It was just the 2 of them, and they were off the coast just a little bit. These things jumped on board and nearly killed both of them. Both of these fishermen, by the way, have requested to remain anonymous in case anything would come back harming their career, which isn't really much of a career, if you ask me, but that's besides the point. The one fisherman, who was bitten and scratched, ended up with a deep infection in his left arm. It started oozing this aquamarine blue ooze that he had to get treated at the hospital. It was highly infectious, had high amounts of unknown bacteria, or so the hospital told him. This was also pre-COVID, and he was lucky, being told by the hospital staff. Had he neglected to get the proper medical attention sooner, he would have had to have had his arm amputated, because whatever this ooze or pus was, it was severely infecting his entire arm. I don't even know how to comment on that. I know nothing about that ooze, or what these creatures did to him. Perhaps it's some sort of venom they produce in some glands they might have. I'm not too sure, but that's not the first time that I've heard about this green-blue ooze that these creatures leave behind. Yet, another terrifying account that I had heard was an older gentleman who was sailing off the coast of the Florida Keys, not too far from shore. He was surrounded by about 7 or 8 of them on his boat, and while the 2 sailors from Greece didn't give me a great description of these beings, he did, and it did seem to coincide with the 2 sailors from Greece. These beings were like a deep blue color, very humanoid, almost half fish, half creature. Huge, large black eyes, almost non-existent lips, and a non-existent nose, except for 2 little nostril holes. Webbing and fins all over its body. It definitely looked like it belonged in the ocean, or that it was a failed science experiment, is what he said. These things emerged from the water, and all made this weird clicking humming noise in unison, almost as if they were communicating to each other. What? I don't know. But after that, they departed, and they were not seen after that. This older gentleman didn't exactly see where they went, because he said it was like they suddenly disappeared. He has never been that frightened in all of his life, and he's lived in southern Florida his entire life, has never seen anything like what he saw that day. It scared him for a while, but I think now he's going out back fishing and sailing again. Good for him. About 6 or 7 years ago, I received an email from someone who called themselves Jack. They, back in 2001, were actually detained by the military because they were on the Gulf Coast of Texas and were on the beach when this creature washed ashore. He said he got a pretty good look at it, even took pictures, said it looked exactly like what you'd expect from a mermaid creature. Not the way that Disney portrays them, but ugly, hideous, half fish, half man, except more ugly, more evil looking. Webbings and spines all over it, large black eyes. I was shocked to hear it was the same description the old man gave me when I compared the 2 stories. Said it had a mouth full of shark-like teeth, and was completely horrified at what this creature was. It was taller and longer than him, having a long fish-like tail and fin behind it. Shortly after, before he even left the beach, a squad of military police arrived, detaining him, taking his phone, and closing down the entire beach. It was early in the morning, so he has no idea how the police or the military police knew about this. He was really the only one at the beach at the time, just on a morning walk, is what he explained to me in the email. He was detained, questioned, and actually arrested and put in jail for about a month. Not like county jail. It was a special military jail, is what he told me. He was questioned every day, what he saw, and what he would refuse to tell the public if it got out. He was given ample threats that he did not see anything, and he was to not tell anybody what he saw. He would not have any of his questions answered either, and that's a scary thing. He was released, but didn't end up sending me this email till, 13, 14 years later after this happened. He still doesn't even know what's going to happen to him, and maybe he'll be arrested. He's not sure. He doesn't even know if he's being watched, but he felt it was important to reach out to other cryptozoologists and share their accounts and information. He was very adamant about the government or military trying to hide and cover up something. Why or what? His theory was that these are being created, bioweapons, and that some of them are failing. Either that, or they're being purposely killed and then thrown into the ocean and washing up. Perhaps they are failed experiments and don't meet all the requirements. But if that is the case, you think they'd have a better disposal other than just throwing them in the ocean. These are just speculations. I can't be too sure. Either way, Jack's account is just as horrifying as any other one. Then we have Macy from Southern California, south of San Diego at the time of the sighting. Her and her young son were walking along the beach in a more deserted section when she says that her and her son were startled by this humanoid creature coming out of the water, running right at them, chasing them. She said it looked horrible, very ugly, kind of somewhat like the creature from the Black Lagoon, but also very fish-like. Said it had sharp spines all over its body, and was a dark green to almost a black color. Her and her son didn't stand there looking too long. They booked it and ran for their lives. This thing continued to chase them until it got to about waist deep in the water, and then resubmerged. She has no idea what that was all about. During this happening, they were probably about shin deep in the water. While I can't be too certain that this was a mermaid creature, it was definitely falling into the category of a humanoid fish oceanic creature. Perhaps a mermaid, perhaps not. Either way, I've attached it to the underwater cryptid section and thought you might appreciate it. Then, back in the early 70s, 1972, I believe if I can remember right, an English submarine was actually attacked by about 12 of these things, nearly taken down and sunken. This thing was about 200 miles off the coast of the Atlantic Ocean of England. For the sake of continuity, I'll just refer to these groups of mermaids as pods. So an entire pod approached this submarine and attacked it. For whatever reason, I'm not sure. Being under attack from an unknown source, the submarine and all the crew in it panicked, not sure what to do. So they fled off. And actually, the submarine made it. But once back to land, and once being able to be rescued, the exterior damage was so bad that it was almost a surprise they even made it back to base. There were deep scratch marks all along the metal of the entire submarine. Scratch marks that, when measured, would equal out slightly larger than that of a human hand, and even fit the hand profile of 5 different fingers, or 4 fingers and an opposable, but dagger-like claw marks. The back of the submarine was what took the most damage, and was the most frightening. The rudders were bent, and nearly almost torn all the way off, and the propeller badly damaged. Something with enough intelligence put all of its effort and focus into damaging that back part, as if whatever it was knew that that's how the submarine steered and propelled itself. That's terrifying. And I know there is no definitive proof. Evidence points out that they were attacked by something that was humanoid and in groups, and was smart enough and intelligent enough to not only strategize, put all of its effort towards the back, where the submarine steers and controls itself. Like I told you, the damage was so bad, it's a miracle of God that the submarine even made it back without fully sinking. That's how bad the damage was. In fact, the submarine was actually rendered inoperable for several months due to severe repairs. This story was shared with me by a retired English Navy captain who served in the English Navy for well over 30 years. And of course, in my opinion, one of the most frightening and first-hand accounts that I've ever been told occurred in South Africa back in the late 80s by a scuba diver, a scientist and exploring more bio-life form. But to what degree, he never told me. He said to me that he witnessed a great white shark being torn apart by 4 or 5 mermaid, half-human, half-fish-looking creatures. He never referred to them as mermaids, but knowing what I do, that's the only conclusion I could come to. He gave considerable details that all matched up with all the previous accounts I shared, and many of the accounts and stories that have been told that I just simply don't have the time to share with you, because, well, there are so many. On a quick note though, in South Africa, at a certain time of year, many of the world's seals gather there, which makes a huge hunting and feeding ground for sharks, so you'll see a lot of sharks gathering there. This was right around that time of year, so it wasn't uncommon for you to run into a shark or seals. But being a scientist and having intelligence about the water and sea life, he knew how to keep his distance and where to be to do what he had to do. When he went on to talk about these half-fish, half-man humanoid creatures, he says they arrived in a group, and they arrived from the bottom, the darkness of the ocean, is what he said. They didn't come from the east or west, but underneath. He told me that he's never seen that kind of intelligence before. They definitely, like dolphins, strategized, worked in a group, and killed this shark, probably within 20 seconds. It also appeared they had crude-like spear-looking things that they used to stab and rip apart this shark. He also mentioned that they were very hideous-looking. Large black eyes, spikes and fins all over their body, and were nearly a dark green-black color, the same as fitting all the other descriptions that I've heard and stories that I've been told. Very strange indeed. He said he was mostly frightened by how intelligent they appeared to be, and how they worked so seamlessly and synergized together in a group. At one point, they all turned to notice him in the water, in which he was now panicking, because here he was, out in the middle ocean, with some unknown humanoid species not far away. They ignored him, though, and took parts of the shark that they ripped apart, and took the entire shark cadaver with them, down into the dark waters below. That was enough for him. He said he was so frightened after the experience, he retired from marine biology for several years after that, refusing to do any more expeditions on research. The man who shared this story with me also wishes to remain anonymous, but has very credible sources, and is even taught as a professor at multiple universities all across the world in marine biology. He is renowned, and if I told you his name, it would be easy to find out who he is. But I'll respect his wishes, so he doesn't damage any of his reputation. That's all the stories I have time for you today. I'll send you one here in a couple days about tons of sightings of Mothman that people have all over the lower eastern United States and all around Point Pleasant.